So in the last video, I started this engine up, and one of the things that I get a lot of questions on is what do I do before I start the engine, and what should I do after I start the engine? So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about both of those and do some of the items on this engine here. First, talk about what to do before you start the engine. One of the biggest things that people do is prime the engine. And if you saw the last video, what I did was I held my foot to the floor, which the throttle position sensor tells the PCM not to fire the injectors, and it'll just turn the car over. It's similar to like if you have a flooded condition in an old carbureted engine, you'd hold your foot to the floor and clear it out. What that does, it won't fire up the engine, but it'll turn it over and it'll turn the oil pump and build up pressure that way. So that's one way you can do it. The other way is with one of these little pumps. This is just a, I think, maybe $20 yard pump. And I put oil in this and cut the end off the wand and added a hose to it and a fitting to go into the oil filter adapter where the oil sending unit is. So you can use this and pump it up. You can do it with the engine in or with the engine out. Some people do it with the engine out to make sure there's oiling all the way up into the cams. And the last thing you can do is just fire it up. I have done all three, and the ones that I just started up without holding my foot to the floor, without using the pump, they ran just fine. They have oil pressure. If you do it that way, or even if you prime it, or if you do the wide open throttle thing, sometimes when you first start it, you'll hear a lot of valve train noise. And if that doesn't go away in like 5 seconds or so when the engine builds pressure, then you might want to shut it off because you may have another issue. So the other question I get is, what should I do once the engine has been started? There's a couple things that I do after I start it, and then you can talk about break-in. How should I break in the engine? And if you ask 10 different engine builders, you'll get 10 different responses, and they'll all be different in some little bit. What I recommend is, one, use the oil that the engine calls for. Unless it's a flat tappet cam engine, then you want to put some oil in there when you first start it up with some zinc in it. But for these engines, just the 520, the turbocharged engines, 530, and that's nothing special. It's easy to remember. On the same subject of oil, when we talk about changing it, sometimes I'll recommend changing the oil or pulling the filter at 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 miles, just to kind of take a look inside there. Some glitter is going to be normal as the internals of the engine start to wear together. And on those flat tap engines, it's recommended to keep the RPM up above 2,000 or varying between 1,500 and 2,500 for the first 20 minutes that it's started. That helps seat the cam and the lifters and all that stuff. That's only if you have a flat tappet cam. At least in my opinion, it's only for the flat tappet cam. If you have a roller cam, it's not going to be as big of an issue. The other topic that comes up when you talk about breaking an engine is seating the rings. And if you read the Manly instructions on their rings, it recommends breaking them in on a dyno or at the racetrack. And some of us don't do that. We build the engines and drive it around. It may take 1,000, 2,000 miles, depending on the driving habits, before those rings really seal up. After I build an engine, I always recommend keeping an eye on the oil level and the coolant level. So if you watch the last video, when I started this engine up, it didn't want to run. It didn't want to start right away. Sometimes they fire up and they run like a top and no problems. This one does have cams in it, but I want to go over everything and make sure I didn't miss something. One of the things I already noticed was that I forgot to plug in the cam position sensor, and the leak that it had was the top transmission line to the radiator. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten that up. I've already plugged in the sensor. The other thing I want to check is and make sure there's no vacuum leak, because when it's hard to idle like that, sometimes it can be a gross vacuum leak. This has a bunch of tape on the PCV system That could be suspect, but I'm going to look around, see, make sure that everything's connected, and make sure there's no vacuum leak anywhere. Okay, everything looks good. Everything looks plugged in. The cooling system looks good. The other thing you can do is pressure test the cooling system. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use this smoke machine and put some smoke to it and see if maybe there's a crack somewhere or a vacuum leak that I missed. Okay, so I got it hooked up. The way this works, put shop air into it. It's powered by the vehicle's battery, and there's a hose that comes off of it that you want to run into the engine. And the idea is you want to block any of the air that could come out. So I got the MAF out, and there's a big cone that goes in there that seals in there. That's where I'm going to put the air into and the smoke into, and see if any smoke comes out. The reason you want to seal the air filter side is because if you don't, the smoke will come out. You want to try and be able to get some pressure on this thing, but we'll put some smoke in there and see what happens. Here you can see the smoke's coming out. It's not a good seal in there. Okay, so I don't see much of anything anywhere except where my connection is inside there. Not 100%, but I do feel better. You will see it come out of the little breather of the IAC. That's normal. I've also seen it come out of the throttle body position sensor. Not too much to be concerned with. So the other thing that I thought about checking was the fuel pressure, but this fuel system worked good with the last setup. When I started it in the last video, it also sounded like it had an exhaust leak. So I'm going to check on the exhaust manifolds on both sides. And I'm going to do it. When you do it, you got to do it really fast because the exhaust manifolds heat up very fast. So as soon as I get it started, I'm going to run out here, stick my hands down there and see if I can feel any exhaust leaks. So that was a lot better. I didn't feel any exhaust leaks down there. I didn't hear what sounded like any exhaust leaks. Just sounded really good out the back. I guess that cam position sensor made a difference on it because it fired right up. You saw the oil pressure had good oil pressure. So now it's ready to get tuned.